On January 4, 2018, according to the U.S. State Department, pursuant to the 1998 International Religious Freedom Act, China is redesignated as a country of particular concern. This is also the 19th consecutive year that China is included in a country of particular concern list. At the same time, when the freedom of religious belief in China draws great attention of the U.S. government, the asylum applications of many Christians of the Church of Almighty God who had been persecuted by the CCP and who had fled abroad to South Korea and other European countries are denied again and again. These governments even issue orders for their deportation and had their alien registration card withdrawn. Once repatriated to China, these Christians are bound to face CCP's arrest, torture, and imprisonment, even the danger of death. Their situations are critical.
Since it took power, the CCP has consistently suppressed and persecuted religious belief, designated the Bible as an evil cult book, labeled Christian house churches as evil cults, and added them in the lists of unlawful organizations. Beginning in 1995, these lists have been published and updated regularly, in which the Church of Almighty God was included. The CCP authorities have also repeatedly declared that it is imperative to destroy the Church of Almighty God, and launched a series of wanton suppression and persecution against it nationwide. According to rough statistics, in the short span of 2 years between 2011 and 2013, there were over 380,000 Christians of the Church of Almighty God arrested, sentenced, and imprisoned by the CCP, of which a minimum of 47 members were persecuted to death. Moreover, the CCP's persecution of the Church of Almighty God has continued to escalate. Eric Roux, chair of the European Interreligious Forum for Religious Freedom, comments on this as follows.
In China, you have some groups who are like government-sanctioned, government-controlled Chinese Christian Protestant churches or evangelical churches. Then you have also some churches that are called like house churches, which are independent churches from the government, who, per what I know, can have troubles, and are not completely free and can be the subject of arbitrariness and persecution. But this is not the worst. The worst is that in China you have a list of religious groups that are, the list is a list of what they translate as dangerous cults. The real translation of that list would be like unorthodox beliefs. And the problem is that when you are on that list, whether you are a Christian group or a Buddhist group or whatever, then the mere fact that you participate, you are active in one of these groups, is considered as a crime. Even if you do anything, if you don't do anything wrong, even if you are the best person, the fact that you participate to a group within the list, you are deemed to be a criminal. This is very dangerous. I mean, this kind of list that have been list of cults, list of destructive cults, have existed in the history in some other countries than China. I mean, they are openly saying that they want to catch people from the Church of Almighty God and send them to jail. And they are doing it, So, of course, there is no other word than persecution. This is some people are persecuted for the faith, not for what they did, You can pretend that, of course, some members did something wrong. Might be true, might be not true, And I'm not here discussing the specific case that has been created for accusing the members of Church of Almighty God to be criminals. But even if one member is a criminal in a group, does not mean that all the other members are criminals. So we are in a case where you are a member of the Church of Almighty God, police can come to your home, take you, send you to jail. So it is a very serious situation that the Church of Almighty God is facing in China.
In China, the CCP's policy toward the Church of Almighty God is troops won't be withdrawn until the ban is done. It deems eradicating the Church of Almighty God the government's priority task, even at the expense of deploying the armed forces and armed police to conduct carpet-style raids across the country. Countless Christians have been arrested, detained, sentenced, or put in prison. Unable to withstand the CCP's persecution, many Christians have had to leave their homeland in order to survive and seek refuge in democratic countries. However, the governments of South Korea and some European countries believe that the evidence of Christians being persecuted by the CCP is insufficient, dismissing the facts that they have been persecuted and repeatedly rejecting their asylum applications. According to relevant data released by Human Rights Without Frontiers, as of December 1, 2017, there had been 1,754 applications for political asylum by Christians of the Church of Almighty God in 14 countries of Europe, of which 780 were rejected, 146 ordered for deportation, and the remaining majority still under review. Among European countries, the French government has issued the largest number of deportation orders. Of the 412 asylum applications submitted, 280 had been rejected and 103 ordered for deportation. About the critical condition that the asylum applications of the Christians from the Church of Almighty God are denied again and again, Eric Roux gives a comment as below.
Whether it is in South Korea, whether it is in Europe, whatever, So what I can say to conclude on this little thing is that a lack of evidence, fine. You can find more evidences, but it should not be taken like, if you don't prove that you are individually persecuted, we do not grant you the asylum. This is not at all the international guidelines for refugees. Then, of course, even if you have been persecuted, in the country where you have been persecuted, you are not delivered with a certificate of persecution. It's normal. So I think there are enough evidences to show that a person who is a member of the Church of Almighty God, if he goes back to China, he has a risk to be arrested. He has a risk to be sent to jail, and it's enough. The fact that there is a risk is enough. Because, of course, he could go back and hide. He could go back and maybe he will not be caught, but that's not a life, Exactly. And you cannot live with a risk like that. And that's the whole purpose of the international laws on refugees is based on that principle that people should not fear for their life, should not fear for their rights of, of course, persecution is not only small troubles, but we are not speaking about small troubles. We are speaking about jail, and of course the right to life. So if there is a risk, you should be granted the asylum.
Compared with some European countries, the South Korean government's refugee policy is akin to rubbing salt in the wound for the Christians of the Church of Almighty God. From 2013 to the present, of the several hundred refugee applicants of the Church of Almighty God, none has been accepted, 172 of which have been ordered for deportation by South Korea's Ministry of Justice. Even the alien registration cards they were entitled to carry as refugee applicants had been withdrawn. Many of them had performed in the gospel movies and choir videos of the Church of Almighty God that have already been posted online. Once they are repatriated to China, the consequences can be imagined. Eric Roux thus makes an appeal.
And my wish would be that the decisions should be suspended until they review the cases and they really dig into it to see what's really happening and to think about what they are doing. Because the problem is that it's easy to say, I do not grant you the asylum. It's easy to say, well, you are not legal here because you don't have the asylum, so you need to go back to your country. But if the person goes back, and then when the person arrives, he or she goes to jail. Mm-hmm. And then let's say that this person will die in jail. Then the country who did that, let's say in good faith, he becomes guilty of what happened to that person.
As stated by Ms. Derek Ru, it is easy to say, I do not grant you asylum. But for the Christians of the Church of Almighty God, what awaits them is more brutal arrests and persecutions by the CCP, even the danger of death. We sincerely hope that more democratic governments would have an in-depth and objective understanding of the fact that the Church of Almighty God has suffered great persecutions by the CCP, rather than relying on CCP's rumors and false news stories to deal with the Church of Almighty God. Lest the most basic protection for Christians' human rights be deprived. To do so, aside from the lack of respect for the Refugee Act, isn't it also a kind of indirect abuse of human rights?